Imagine a street where every house once cost as much as a factory. Marble staircases, crystal chandeliers, private drivers waiting at every door. This was the richest street in Detroit. Millionaire's Row, the place where auto kings and financial predators lived. If you were born here, you owned the city. But look at it today. The same facades. Now with broken windows, a place that once echoed with jazz and laughter has turned into a corridor of burned-out mansions, graffiti, and weeds. Politicians call it the natural decline of the city. But behind this darkness hides another story. Greed, racial segregation, red lines on bank maps, strange fires that started exactly when owners needed insurance money. This is not just a story about old houses. It is a story about the people who were pushed out of Detroit's most expensive street, and those who got rich from its death. And today, among the ruins, a few houses still stand, where sometimes at night a light turns on, as if someone is still guarding the secrets of Millionaire's Row. What really killed the richest street in Detroit? Time, crisis, or a carefully planned crime no one wants to talk about out loud? If you enjoy deep investigations into Gilded Age architecture and the families who built it, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which house to explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Chapter 1: Night Tour Through a Broken Street. The tour begins at dusk, when the sky is still faintly blue and the streetlights are just starting to buzz. Jamal, an architect in his mid-30s, stands beneath a flickering streetlight on Woodward Avenue. Behind him, 6 people cluster together, phones raised, their flashlight beams cutting narrow cones through the growing dark. This is what is left of Detroit's most famous corridor of wealth, a stretch of road where an address once meant you had already won. They walk slowly. Jamal points to an empty lot on the left. Weeds push through cracked concrete. A rusted chain-link fence leans around nothing in particular. This was the Henderson Mansion, he says. 40 rooms, built in 1895, gone by 1978. The group murmurs. Someone snaps a photo of the emptiness, as if trying to capture a house that is no longer there. Across the street, a single building glows. Warm light spills from tall windows. Music drifts out. Jazz, maybe blues. The structure is massive stone and brick, its facade carefully restored and cleaned. A discreet sign reads the Millionaire's Table, a restaurant tucked inside what was once a timber baron's private palace. That one survived, Jamal says. His voice carries a mix of pride and something heavier, a sound that might be relief or tiredness from telling this story so many times. They continue north. The street widens. More empty lots open up between scattered mid-century buildings. A gas station, a self-storage box, a shuttered medical clinic with faded letters over the door. The architecture tells no clear story. It looks as if someone took scissors to a photograph and cut out most of the image, leaving random fragments floating in white space. Jamal stops at another fence. This one wraps around something real, a mansion, or what remains of one. 3 stories of stone, windows sealed with plywood. The roof sags. Graffiti climbs the lower walls, yet the skeleton still stands. The grand entrance, the coved bay windows, the carved stone flourishes that once signaled wealth so large it needed no explanation. This is the Holbrook House, Jamal says quietly. Last of the originals on this block, built 1902, reportedly cost $200,000 when factory workers made $2 a day. He does not tell them the rest yet, that he grew up hearing stories about this street. That his grandmother rode the bus past these houses every morning on her way to clean someone else's home in a different rich neighborhood. That his father brought him here as a boy and said, "This was our Millionaire's Row," meaning Detroit's, meaning something that once felt like it belonged to the whole city, even if most people could never live here. The tour group takes their photos. Someone asks if the house is haunted. Jamal smiles and gives them the expected ghost story. The old lumber king who supposedly walks the empty halls at night searching for the fortune he lost. But his eyes keep drifting back across the street to that plywood-covered facade. The real ghost story is simpler. A street that forgot it was rich. A city that slowly trained itself not to look. The tour ends near his car. People fake him, tuck phones into pockets, and head toward their own vehicles. Jamal pulls out his phone. 3 unread emails wait on the screen. The top one is from a city address he does not recognize. Subject line: Notice of demolition proposal. 4510 Woodward Avenue. He does not open it. Not yet. He stands there in the cooling night air, staring at that last mansion, the one that somehow survived fires and foreclosures and decades of being left alone. His phone vibrates again. The same email nudges its way back to the top, still unopened. For the first time in his years of leading these tours, Jamal wonders if telling stories about loss is enough, or if just once he might have to try to stop the ending from being written. Chapter 2. When Woodward was the red carpet. To understand what Jamal sees in that abandoned mansion, you have to go back. Back to when Woodward Avenue was not a street of ghosts, but a street of arrivals. The year is 1890. Detroit is growing faster than almost any other city in America. Money pours in from timber, from iron, from the new automobile business that will soon reshape the planet. And the men who control that money need somewhere to show the world what they have become. They choose Woodward. The avenue is wide and tree-lined, close enough to downtown for convenience, but far enough away to feel removed from the smoke and noise. Land is still open. The city is pushing north. This is where you build if you want to announce, without a word, that you have arrived. The first mansions rise quickly, stone and brick. Almost never wood. Wood is for ordinary houses. These buildings are meant to last. They need weight. They are designed to say, my family will still be here when yours is forgotten. One of the largest takes shape in 1902. The foundation alone requires weeks of labor. Crews dig deep into Michigan clay, pour thick concrete, set massive stone blocks by hand and pulley. The walls climb 3 full stories. Indiana limestone covers the facade. Marble from Vermont forms the grand staircase. Carved oak panels line the library. Stained glass windows arrive in crates from a workshop in Chicago. The budget reportedly climbs past $200,000. To put that in context, a skilled factory worker in Detroit earns perhaps $600 in a year. This single house costs the rough equivalent of 300 years of that person's wages. The owner is a man named Holbrook. His first name lost in incomplete records. His trade listed simply as automotive parts manufacturing. He is not the richest man on the street, not even close, but he is rich enough to stand among them. The house holds 40 rooms. The ballroom spreads across the 2nd floor. Servants' quarters fill the attic. A carriage house sits in back, soon to be adapted for automobiles instead of horses. Steam heat runs through the walls. Electric lights glow in every major room, a luxury when large parts of Detroit still rely on gas. None of this is unusual. Up and down Woodward, similar projects march forward. The Wilson Mansion, the Crawford Estate, the Merrick House. Each one a little bigger than the last. Each owner trying to outdo his neighbor in some careful way. An extra bay window, a more dramatic entrance, imported tile instead of local, a longer drive, a higher roof line. By 1915, the transformation is complete. Woodward Avenue, especially the stretch between Grand Boulevard and Milwaukee Street, has become what newspapers call the most fashionable address in Michigan. Horse-drawn carriages give way to Pierce arrows and Packards. Garden parties spill onto clipped lawns. Winter galas throw light from every window into the snow. If you live here, you have already won. If you are invited here, you matter. If you work here, that is a different story entirely. The street is not just pavement, it is a statement. Wealth gathered, displayed, guarded. These mansions burn more money in coal and steam in one winter than most families earn in 5 years. The annual property taxes alone outrun what laborers pay in rent for an entire year. Almost no one in these circles questions this. It is treated as natural. The men who built Detroit's factories and foundries are said to deserve palaces. Their wives are said to deserve ballrooms. Their children are told they deserve marble staircases, private tutors, and lives carefully insulated from the city's grit. The street turns into a symbol. When you say Woodward Avenue in certain rooms, you do not mean the whole long road. You mean this small stretch, Millionaire's Row, the place where the game feels finished before it even begins. What they do not discuss, what the society pages never print, is who actually keeps these houses alive. That story lives on different streets entirely. Chapter 3: The Invisible Street Behind the Street. The mansions do not run themselves. Every morning before the sun fully rises, the streetcars fill. They rattle north along Woodward, south from the neighborhoods where Detroit's working people actually live. Black families from the east side, European immigrants, Polish, German, Irish, from the west. They crowd onto wooden benches, lunch pails on their laps, heading toward houses they will never own. The same years, the same street, but a different view entirely. At the Holbrook mansion, the household staff slips in through the back entrance. A cook, 2 housemaids, a laundress who comes twice a week, a gardener, a chauffeur who sleeps in a small room above the carriage house. The exact number shifts with the seasons and the social calendar. But the rule stays the same. Wealthy families demand workers, and workers stay invisible. This is the unspoken architecture of Millionaire's Row. The grand staircases belong to owners and guests. The narrow back stairs are for staff. The ballrooms gleam under chandeliers. The kitchens swelter in summer heat. The marble entrance is designed to impress. The servants' rooms under the roof have sloped ceilings, thin walls, and small windows that barely open. The pay is steady but modest. A housemaid might earn $8 a week. The cook, if she is skilled, perhaps 12. They work 6 days, sometimes 7 during the thick of the social season. They move through rooms filled with objects worth more than their yearly wages. They dust furniture that costs what their families pay in rent for an entire year. They do not complain much. The job is better than the factories, safer than the foundries, more reliable than day labor. For black workers especially, domestic service in wealthy homes is one of the few paths to regular income in a city where many employers simply will not hire them at all. But the line is hard and clear. Jamal's grandmother talked about this years later, her voice matter-of-fact, without bitterness, but without illusions. She worked a few streets away, in the Boston Edison district where automotive magnates built even larger estates. She knew girls who worked on Woodward. The rules matched everywhere. Those were houses you did not walk past without a reason, she said. Either you worked there or you had no business being there. The workers live in neighborhoods with different names: Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, Hamtramck. Streets where houses are smaller, packed closer together, chopped into several units, where families share kitchens and bathrooms, where rent bites deep into wages, because there are not many other choices. These neighborhoods never appear in the society pages that worship Millionaire's Row. The newspapers describe garden parties, debut balls, winter galas. They do not mention who cooked the food, who scrubbed the ballroom afterward, who pressed the formal wear, polished the silver, and kept the coal furnaces roaring through Michigan winters. This invisibility is not random. It is built into the system. The wealth on display along Woodward rests on labor that must stay out of sight. The fantasy of effortless prosperity only works if the effort is hidden. By 1920, the pattern has hardened. Millionaire's Row is a stage set, polished and bright. The workers are stage hands, essential but unseen. The streetcars bring them in before dawn and carry them away after dark, helping maintain the illusion that wealth simply exists, needing no hands but those of the wealthy themselves. This arrangement will hold for decades. The mansions will stand, the parties will roll on, the same streetcars will follow the same tracks, but the ground is already shifting. Economic forces and racial tension are building pressure below the surface. The street that looks so permanent, so solid, is more fragile than anyone living there is willing to admit, and when it finally breaks, the workers will be the first to pay the price. Chapter 4. The letter that changes everything. The tour is over. The street is quiet again. Jamal sits in his car, engine off, dashboard light washing his hands in a soft glow. He stares at his phone. The email is still there, still unopened. The subject line hangs on the screen like a warning. Notice of demolition proposal. 4510 Woodward Avenue. He knows that address. It is the Holbrook house. The last one. His finger hovers over the glass. He has seen notices like this before, or at least heard about them through the preservation circles he drifts around the edge of. They are usually polite, heavy with bureaucratic phrasing, and quietly final. The language almost never changes, structurally unsound, prohibitively expensive to restore. Best use of the property requires removal of existing structure. Translation in his head, we are tearing it down. He taps and opens the email. The message is short. A demolition proposal has been filed by a company called Great Lakes Storage Solutions. The structure at 4510 Woodward Avenue has been deemed unsafe. A public comment period will remain open for 30 days. Renderings of the proposed replacement are attached below. Jamal opens the first attachment. Glass and steel, clean lines. A modern self-storage facility, 4 stories high, with climate-controlled units and 24-hour access. The rendering shows the building at dusk, every corridor softly lit. Handsome in that efficient, polished way modern commercial boxes can be. Professional, neutral, completely disconnected from anything around it. The Holbrook mansion appears nowhere in the image. It is simply gone, not even a shadow. Replaced, paved over, erased. He sits there for a long moment, phone in his hand. Traffic slides past on Woodward. A bus rumbles by, its interior lights harsh and fluorescent, faces turned toward home. He thinks about his grandmother on those morning streetcars, about his father, who brought him to this exact stretch when Jamal was maybe 10 years old. They stood on the sidewalk together, his father's hand resting on his shoulder. The mansion was already empty then, already peeling and sagging, but still impressive, still standing. This was our Millionaire's Row, his father said. Not their Millionaire's Row, meaning the wealthy families, our Millionaire's Row, meaning Detroit's, meaning something that, in his mind, belonged to the whole city, even if it had been built by and for people who would never have let most Detroiters through the front door. His father was an electrician, practical, not the type to get sentimental over buildings, but he stared at that house like it mattered in some way that did not fit on a blueprint. Your great-grandfather helped wire some of these places, he added, back when they were new. He was not allowed to use the front entrance, but he knew every inch of the walls inside. Jamal was too young then to feel the weight of that sentence. The pride and the hurt twisted together. The idea that you could build something beautiful and still never be welcome in it. He understands it now. He closes the email and flips to his contacts. Scrolls through names until he finds one he has not used in months. Detroit Historical Preservation Alliance. He met their team at a conference last year. They handed him a card, told him to reach out if he ever wanted to do more than just guide tours and tell stories on weekends. He never called. Leading tours is one thing. Walking people through what is already gone, narrating losses and ghosts. That feels safe, contained. You point at empty lots, explain what used to stand there. Everyone nods sadly, maybe snaps a photo, then goes home. The landscape stays the same. Actually trying to stop a demolition? That is something else. That means stepping into meetings, filing comments, risking failure in public. That means believing you might win. And Jamal let go of that belief a long time ago. But his thumb is already on the screen. Already hitting the call button. The phone rings once, twice. A woman answers. Preservation Alliance, this is Maria. Jamal takes a breath. Hi, my name is Jamal Williams. I lead historical tours on Woodward Avenue. I just received a demolition notice for 4510 Woodward, and I don't know. I think maybe I want to do something about it. There is a brief pause on the line. Then, can you come to our office tomorrow morning? Yes, he says. I can. Chapter 5. The people who keep trying. The office is smaller than Jamal expected. One room on the second floor of an old commercial building near Eastern Market. Exposed brick walls covered with framed photographs. Mansions, theaters, churches, some already gone, others barely hanging on. A worn conference table, mismatched chairs, file boxes stacked in the corner. Labeled by neighborhood. Brush Park, Corktown, Boston Edison, Woodward Corridor. Two people wait for him. The first is older, maybe 70, with silver hair pulled back in a careful bun. She reaches out her hand. Catherine Moore. I have been leading preservation tours since 1983. The second is younger, early 30s, in practical business clothes, with the tired eyes of someone who works long hours for not much money. Maria Chen. I am a volunteer attorney. I help with the legal side when we can afford to fight. They sit. Catherine pours coffee from a thermos into paper cups. The small act feels like a ceremony. A little kindness before hard news. Tell us about the Holbrook house, Catherine says. Jamal explains what he knows. Built in 1902, original owner made parts for the rising auto industry. Around 40 rooms, limestone facade, marble staircase, empty since the late 1980s, boarded up, slowly decaying, but the structure still powerful. The last surviving mansion on that particular run of Woodward. And now Great Lakes Storage wants it gone, Maria says. She has already pulled up the demolition filing on her laptop. They bought the property 6 months ago, paid cash. They are moving fast. Can we stop them? Jamal asks. The two women share a glance. It is not quite hopeless, but it is not rosy either. It looks like practiced realism. Maybe, Catherine says slowly. The real question is whether we can make the fight costly enough that they start looking for other options. She lays out the map. Detroit has some historic districts with real protection, where demolition needs special approval, and community voices carry weight. Boston Edison is protected. Parts of Indian Village. The Woodward Corridor near the Detroit Institute of Arts. But 4510 Woodward sits just outside that shield. The historic district line was drawn decades earlier, and this piece of Millionaire's Row landed on the wrong side of the border. It was not an accident, Maria adds. Those lines were drawn when these houses were already in trouble, when the area was already mostly black and poor. Saving them was not on anyone's list. So we have no legal leverage? Jamal asks. Not much, Maria admits. We can file objections during the comment period. We can try to pull in media, stir up public pressure. If we can show the building has special historic value, we might slow things down long enough to find a different buyer. But that is a long shot. Catherine leans forward, elbows on the table. Here is what I have learned in 40 years of this work. You cannot save everything. Sometimes you lose, even when you do every single thing right. But sometimes, not often, but sometimes, you make enough noise that developers decide it is easier to work with you than against you. She nods toward a photograph on the wall. A tall Victorian mansion, perfectly restored, now a small hotel. We lost 12 houses on that block, she says. We saved one. That is the ratio. And you know what? That one matters. People get married there every weekend. Families bring their kids. It is still standing because a few stubborn people refuse to let it vanish quietly. Jamal studies the photograph, then the boxes of files, then the two women in front of him who keep showing up, keep swinging, knowing how often the answer is no. What do I need to do? He asks. Maria slides a sheet of paper across the table. Start with this. It is a formal objection to the demolition. Sign it. We will file it tomorrow. Jamal reads it quickly. The legal language is dense, but the heart of it is clear. This building matters. This history matters. This loss is not automatic. He writes his name at the bottom. It feels at the same time tiny and huge. Just a signature on a form. The first step into a fight he will probably lose. But for the first time in years, he is not only telling stories about what has already disappeared. He is trying to stop the next erasure before it happens. Chapter 6. The Golden Mile. The objection is filed. The waiting begins. Jamal finds himself spending more time in archives than on the street. The main branch of the Detroit Public Library, the Burton Historical Collection, the Walter P. Reuther Library at Wayne State. He is looking for ammunition, photographs, documents, anything that might prove the Holbrook house is worth saving. Instead, he starts to see more clearly what has already been lost. He sits at a microfilm reader, scrolling through old city directories and Sanborn fire insurance maps. The maps are precise and color-coded, showing every building's footprint, construction material, and height. He finds Woodward Avenue as it looked in 1910. The density is startling. Block after block of large houses. The Holbrook place is there. Marked in pink for brick construction. 3 stories. Detached. Surrounded by similar mansions. The Henderson place to the south. The Wilson estate to the north. The Crawford mansion across the street. He pulls out his tablet, opens a modern satellite view, and holds it beside the glowing microfilm screen. More than half the mansions are gone. Simply gone. In their place, parking lots, gas stations, empty parcels overgrown with sumac and ailanthus trees, a few mid-century commercial boxes that now look tired and out of time. The landscape has been erased and rewritten, but the new text feels broken, without rhythm. He photographs the comparison and drops it into a group chat with Catherine and Maria. Catherine replies almost at once. This is what we're fighting. Not just one house. The systematic erasure of an entire streetscape. Jamal keeps digging. He pulls society pages from the Detroit Free Press and the Detroit News. The coverage is predictable. Gala announcements, debutante ball write-ups, detailed lists of who attended which garden party. The language is flowery and eager to please, journalism built to flatter the rich. But between the lines, he can see the shape of a whole world. A winter reception at the Holbrook Mansion, December 1912. Around 200 guests. Music by a 12-piece orchestra. Dinner served at midnight. The article lists the important names. Automotive executives, banking dynasties, the mayor, a visiting state senator. These are not just wealthy residents. These are the people who run Detroit. This is what the street once stood for: concentrated power. Decisions made over brandy and private libraries. Access tightly controlled. If you lived here, you helped shape the city. If you did not, you lived inside the results of those choices. He finds architectural surveys from the 1970s, when a few preservationists tried to record what was left. By then, many mansions had already been demolished or chopped into offices and boarding houses. The Holbrook house was still residential but split into apartments. The survey notes deteriorating condition and deferred maintenance, but also significant architectural integrity, and one of the finest remaining examples of turn-of-the-century residential architecture on Woodward Avenue. 40 years ago, someone believed it was worth saving, and here it still stands, just barely. Jamal leans back in his chair. Around him, other researchers move quietly. Students hunched over laptops, genealogists reading census records, historians scribbling notes. The library is warm. Late afternoon light filters through tall windows and pulls on the tables. He thinks about his tours, about standing in front of bare lots and saying, "This is where the Henderson Mansion stood," about how abstract that feels. A name, a date, a house that might as well be made up, because most people cannot picture it anymore. But these maps, these photographs, they make it concrete. They show the scale of what Detroit chose to let slip away. Not through some unstoppable natural process, but through decisions made by specific people who decided that parking lots were more valuable than palaces, that storage units mattered more than memory. His phone buzzes. A text from Maria. "Can you meet tomorrow? We need to talk strategy." Developer is pushing for expedited approval. Jamal types back, "I'll be there." He saves his images, gathers his notes, and walks out into the cooling evening. The fight is only beginning, and already he can feel how easy it would be to lose. But his mind keeps circling those maps, the thick pattern of rooftops that once lined this road, a street that used to be whole. Maybe that picture is worth fighting for. Even if he loses, even if the only thing he manages is to make the loss impossible to ignore. Chapter 7. One invented family, real patterns. To understand what happened to the street, you have to understand who lived there. The historical record is patchy. The Holbrook name shows up in city directories and property files, but the family itself left almost nothing personal behind. No diaries, no stack of letters, just fragments. A marriage notice here, a business filing there, a brief line in a society column. So Jamal does what historians sometimes must do. He builds a composite. He takes what is documented about similar families on similar streets and folds it together into one representative life. The Holbrooks become a useful fiction built out of real patterns. The patriarch, call him Robert Holbrook, arrives in Detroit in the 1880s. He is an engineer trained in Massachusetts, pulled west by the promise of work. He starts as a designer at one of the early automotive parts companies. The industry is young, messy, wide open. He is good at his job. He patents a modest improvement to transmission systems. It does not change the world, but it works. His factory adopts it. Then others follow. He negotiates royalty deals. Checks begin to arrive. By 1900, he owns a share of the company. By 1902, he is wealthy enough to commission a mansion on Woodward Avenue. The house is not the biggest on the street, but it is large. Around 40 rooms, modern systems, enough space for a growing family. He and his wife have 3 children already, with a 4th on the way. This is the rhythm Jamal sees repeated in the archives. First generation earns the money, second generation receives it. The mansion becomes the physical proof of arrival, of having crossed the line into Detroit's ruling class. He imagines the daily life inside those walls. Not just the formal evenings captured in newspapers, but the private habits. Children sliding down the marble banister when no one is watching. The cook working in the hot basement kitchen. The chauffeur polishing the Packard in the carriage house. Winter mornings when condensation fogs the tall panes. Summer evenings when the family drinks coffee on the terrace and watches the street. These details are not written down anywhere, but they are reasonable guesses. Wealthy families lived in certain ways. The layout of the house shaped their routines. The servants' labor made their comfort possible. Robert Holbrook likely assumes his house will stand for generations, that his children and their children will move through those same rooms, that the street will stay what it is, a fixed monument to success, but economics do not honor anyone's plans. By the 1920s, the auto industry is consolidating. Smaller firms are swallowed by larger ones. Competition grows brutal. Some families become even richer. Others simply hold steady. A few start slipping, drifting from fortunes too comfortable to stretched. The Holbrooks, in Jamal's reconstruction, land in that middle group. Still wealthy, but no longer rising. Their money sits in a business that is slowly being left behind as the industry matures. The children grow older. The eldest son eases into the company but lacks his father's knack for engineering. The daughters marry and leave, one to New York, one to Chicago. The big house begins to feel oversized for the people still living in it. This, too, is a familiar pattern. The second generation often lacks the hunger that created the fortune. They inherit assets, but not the circumstances that demanded invention. They maintain, but they do not build. By the 1930s, Robert Holbrook is aging. The Depression hits, his company survives, but profits shrink. The mansion becomes a financial weight. Property taxes are high. Heating a 3-story stone house through Michigan winters costs real money. Wages for staff still have to be paid. Other Woodward families feel the same pressure. Some sell and move to newer, fashionable suburbs. Others turn the houses into something else. Doctors' offices, rooming houses, private clubs. The street begins its slow change. Not collapse yet, but the first cracks in the idea that this world is permanent. Jamal looks over his notes, this imagined family stitched from documented trends. The Holbrooks are made up, but their arc is not. It mirrors dozens of real families who built those mansions expecting them to last forever, only to watch the conditions that made them possible vanish. For the moment, the houses remain. The facades still stand, but the world that created them is already slipping away. And what comes next for the street will be much harsher than anyone in those parlors ever imagined. Chapter 8. Lines on a Map. The crack widens. The transformation speeds up. To understand what happens next, you have to understand redlining. Jamal finds the maps in a National Archives digital collection. They were drawn in the 1930s by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, a federal agency told to measure mortgage risk in American cities. Each neighborhood is color-coded. Green for best, blue for still desirable, yellow for definitely declining, red for hazardous. Detroit's map looks like a patchwork quilt sewn by someone with very firm ideas about who deserves investment. The wealthy suburbs north of the city glow green. Grosse Pointe, Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills. These are the places where banks gladly write mortgages, where property values are expected to climb, where the future is labeled secure. Most of Detroit is yellow or red. Neighborhoods with significant black populations are almost always marked hazardous, no matter what the houses actually look like. The written assessments are blunt: infiltration of Negroes, or threat of Negro encroachment. This is not hidden. This is policy. Woodward Avenue runs like a spine through the map. The stretch where the Holbrook mansion stands is shaded yellow, declining, but not yet hazardous. The notes mention large, older homes, conversion to apartments, changing character of area. The effect is immediate and structural. Banks will not issue normal mortgages in red districts. They are wary in yellow zones. If you want to buy in these areas, you need cash, or you accept predatory contracts, high interest, short payback windows, balloon payments that make default feel almost guaranteed. Meanwhile, the suburbs explode with growth. The Federal Housing Administration guarantees loans for new houses in white areas. Developers carve entire subdivisions out of farmland with written promises that homes will never be sold to black families. The deeds literally carry racial covenants. The wealthy families along Woodward begin to leave, not in a sudden stampede, but in a steady drift. They sell their mansions and move to places like Grosse Pointe, where the houses are newer, the lots wider, and the neighbors are guaranteed to look like them. The Holbrook family, in Jamal's reconstruction, holds on longer than most. Robert dies in 1938. His widow stays in the house with their youngest son. The building is now far too large for the two of them. Half the rooms stay closed. The staff shrinks to a single housekeeper who comes 3 times a week. By 1945, the son inherits. He works as a middle manager at an automotive supplier, comfortable, but no longer truly wealthy. The house has become a weight. The taxes keep rising. The roof needs repairs. The old heating system requires constant work. He makes a practical choice. He chops the mansion into apartments. The ballroom on the second floor becomes 2 units. The former servants' rooms under the eaves become another 2. The grand rooms on the first floor are subdivided again. 5 apartments total, maybe 6. The marble staircase remains. The carved oak panels stay on the walls, but the meaning of the place shifts. This is no longer a single-family palace. It is now a rooming house for people who cannot afford or cannot access other housing. Other mansions along Woodward follow similar paths. Some become professional offices for doctors, dentists, lawyers. Some turn into boarding houses. Some get sold to churches or fraternal lodges. A few simply sit empty. Too costly to keep up, too hard to sell. The street's character splinters. Where there was once a uniform world, wealth, whiteness, concentrated power, there is now a mix of uses and people. Working-class families, black families moving into areas that once shut them out, small businesses. The demographic shift that the redlining maps both predicted and forced. This is the mechanism at work. Not some vague natural decline, not random urban decay, specific policies that channel investment away from some neighborhoods and toward others. The maps literally draw the lines that decide which streets are supported and which are left to fall apart. Woodward Avenue, Millionaire's Row, lands on the wrong side of those lines. The mansions still stand for now, but the money that might have cared for them goes elsewhere. To subdivisions in former cornfields, to developments where the houses are smaller but fresh, to places where banks will actually lend. The street begins to die. Not because it is old, because it has been marked for death, and the worst is still ahead. Chapter 9: Fire, Flight, and the Long Decline. The maps set the pattern. The 1960s rip it open. This is the period Jamal approaches most carefully. The history is close enough to sting. His grandmother lived through it. His father was a child during the worst years. The scars are still etched into the streets and into the people who stayed. The breaking point comes in July 1967. Jamal does not linger on the violence itself. That story has been told elsewhere, often badly, usually with more interest in burning buildings than in causes. What matters for this street is what came after. How already existing trends suddenly went into fast forward. White flight turns into white evacuation. Families who were thinking about leaving leave at once. Those who plan to stay rethink everything. The suburbs promise safety, they tell themselves. better schools, newer roads and sewers. They rarely say race out loud, but race sits inside every conversation, every choice. The businesses follow the families. Factories close or shift to industrial parks along the freeways. Retail moves to new shopping centers just beyond the city line. The tax base erodes. City services weaken. The cuts make life worse, and the worsening conditions become the reason more people leave. This is not only a Detroit story. Versions of it unfold across American cities. But Detroit feels it harder because the local economy leans so heavily on a single industry, and that industry is spreading outward, chasing lower costs, automating plants, and throwing workers overboard. The Holbrook mansion, still chopped into apartments, starts to lose tenants. By 1970, only 2 units remain occupied. The owner, the son of the original Holbrook, can no longer keep up with the building. The roof starts to leak. The old heating system fails. He patches and repairs where he can, but the house is always one step ahead of him. In 1973, he sells. The buyer is a real estate speculator collecting distressed properties along Woodward. The strategy, at least on paper, is simple. Hold until the market rebounds. Maybe convert the buildings to offices. Maybe clear them and redevelop the land. The rebound never comes. The mansion is sliced even further. Big rooms turn into single rentals. The marble staircase, once polished every week, goes years without proper cleaning. The carved oak panels get slathered in cheap latex paint. The stained glass windows, too costly to maintain, are pulled out and swapped for plain panes. One breaks and is covered with plywood that never comes back off. This is not just a one-off case. Up and down Woodward, the same pattern plays out. The Henderson mansion becomes a clinic, then closes. The Wilson estate turns into a nursing home until money troubles force it to shut. The Crawford house sits empty for years, then burns in a suspicious fire. The owner had been trying to sell for ages, and suddenly there is insurance money instead of an unsellable shell. By 1980, the stretch of Woodward that was once Millionaire's Row is almost unrecognizable. Roughly half the mansions are gone, replaced by surface parking, or left as scrubby vacant land. The survivors stand in various stages of decay. Only one, the old timber baron's palace, has actually been rescued, restored, and turned into the restaurant that still glows at night. The Holbrook house survives, but just. It has passed through several hands, each buyer coming in cheap and hoping for a turnaround that never arrives. The basic structure holds. Those 1902 foundations were built to last, but everything above them is fraying. By 1987, the building is empty. The last tenants move out. The owner boards the windows for security. Then it just sits. Years roll past. Graffiti creeps across the lower walls. Kids squeeze in through a broken basement window. Someone lights a small fire on the second floor. It dies out before it spreads, but it leaves black scars on the ceiling. The city talks about demolition more than once. But the mansion is never quite damaged enough to qualify as an emergency, and there is no spare money for anything that is not urgent. So it stands, a monument to neglect, a palazzo, slowly turning into a ruin. This is what Jamal points to on his tours. Not just one deserted house, but the end point of decades of policy, economic shifts, and deliberate choices about whose neighborhoods are worth saving and whose are not. The street that was built to look eternal lasted barely 80 years before it truly began to die. And now, with one email and one proposal, someone is trying to finish the job. Chapter 10. Brief Hope. The research turns into a weapon. Jamal gathers everything into a single clear presentation. Historic photographs of Woodward Avenue at its peak. The architectural survey from the 1970s that calls the Holbrook house one of the finest remaining mansions on the corridor. Redlining maps layered over modern satellite images to show how policy pushed the street into decline. Before and after shots of the entire block. He uploads it all to a simple website. At the top, he adds a petition. Then he writes the description himself, trying to keep Catherine's calm, measured style, but still speak plainly to anyone who cares about the city. This was the richest street in Detroit. Now only one mansion survives on this block. Should we let it die? Or give it one more chance? He shares the link on social media, posts it in local history groups, emails it to preservation organizations across Michigan. The response catches him off guard. Within 48 hours, the petition passes 3,000 signatures. The local TV station runs a 2-minute story in the evening news. Drone footage of the boarded-up mansion cross-cut with archival images of its brightest days. A Detroit Free Press columnist writes a piece about the quiet erasure of our architectural inheritance. Then History TikTok notices. Someone makes a short video using his images, with a sliding then and now effect set to soft, melancholy music. It passes 500,000 views, then 1 million. What hits Jamal hardest are the comments. They come not just from Detroit, but from Cleveland, Buffalo, St. Louis, Pittsburgh. People in other Rust Belt cities who recognize their own streets in this story. Architecture students weighing in. People whose grandparents worked in these houses. Even descendants of families who once lived along Woodward. My great-grandmother cleaned houses on this street, one comment reads. She always said they were the most beautiful buildings she'd ever seen. It broke her heart when they started coming down. The petition climbs to 10,000 signatures, then 15,000. The numbers feel unreal. Maria calls. We are getting attention, she says. That is good, but attention by itself is not enough. We need a concrete plan. 2 days later, a plan appears from an unexpected direction. A small local developer named Marcus Chen contacts them through the Preservation Alliance. For the past decade, he has been buying struggling historic buildings in Detroit and turning them into mixed-use spaces. Modest apartments, artist studios, small retail on the ground floor. His projects are not flashy, but they work. He is not chasing a giant payday. He is trying to make run-down blocks livable again. They meet at a coffee shop near the Detroit Institute of Arts. Marcus is younger than Jamal expects, maybe around 40, dressed casually, carrying a worn leather portfolio under his arm. I have been watching that building for years, Marcus says. I looked at buying it twice, but the numbers never made sense. Too much deferred maintenance, too much risk. And now? Jamal asks. Now people care, Marcus replies. Public interest changes the equation. He opens his portfolio and spreads rough sketches across the table. Adaptive reuse, he explains. We keep the exterior and whatever major interior features can be saved. The staircase, the oak paneling, any original details that are still intact. The upper floors become apartments. The ground floor becomes shared space. Co-working, small events, maybe a coffee shop. The building pays its own way through rent and still stays open to the public. The drawings are simple, but Jamal can see it. The mansion is still clearly the Holbrook house, but alive again. People leaning on the polished rail of the marble staircase, warm light pouring through restored windows. What does the timeline look like? Maria asks. She has joined them, legal pad open, already writing. If we can halt the demolition and negotiate a purchase, Marcus says, we are looking at maybe 18 months to 2 years. It depends on financing and on what we find when we finally get inside the structure. Jamal studies the sketches. This is more than he allowed himself to hope for. Not just saving a shell, but giving it a working future. A job in the city's life, not just a plaque on a wall. What do you need from us? He asks. Time, Marcus answers. I need time to assemble financing and a formal proposal. Can you slow the process down? Delay the demolition long enough for us to make an offer that the current owner will take seriously? Maria and Catherine exchange a long look. We can try, Catherine says at last. Great Lakes Storage has momentum. They want this done quickly. They are counting on silence. Then we move quickly too, Marcus says. That evening, Jamal walks along Woodward as the sun drops behind the buildings. He stops in front of the boarded-up mansion. For the first time in months, maybe years, he lets himself lean into the idea that this might actually work. The house is still silent. Plywood still covers the windows. The stone still wears its stains and cracks. But in his mind, he can already see light behind the glass. People coming and going. The marble steps shining again under careful polish. History preserved not as a frozen museum exhibit, but as a place where people live, work, and gather. The street remembering that it was once rich, and learning how to become something better than it was. Chapter 11. When the floor disappears. The meeting is set for Tuesday afternoon. City Council chambers. Public comment on the demolition proposal. Jamal arrives early with Catherine and Maria. Marcus is already there, portfolio under his arm, wearing a suit this time. They take seats in the front row. The room fills slowly. A few other preservationists, some neighbors, a reporter from local TV. The council members file in. The session starts with pure bureaucracy, other agenda items first, a zoning variance, a street repair contract, line items and roll calls, the routine work of running a struggling city, then Item 7B, demolition proposal for 4510 Woodward Avenue. A city planner steps to the microphone and lays out the basics. The structure has been vacant since 1987. It has multiple code violations. The building department has deemed it structurally unsafe. Great Lakes Storage Solutions has submitted a plan to demolish the mansion and construct a climate-controlled storage facility in its place. The project, the planner says, will generate tax revenue and remove a blighted property. When public comment opens, Maria stands. She is ready. She walks them through the building's historical significance, cites the old architectural survey that singled out the Holbrook house, mentions the petition and how many people have signed it. Then she introduces Marcus and his adaptive reuse proposal. Marcus presents his sketches, explains the financial model in simple terms, says he is prepared to make a formal offer to purchase the property if the council grants him 60 days to secure financing and complete due diligence. The council members listen politely. They ask a few clarifying questions. Their tone is not hostile, but it is not hopeful either. Then the representative from Great Lakes Storage speaks. He is smooth, professional, almost sympathetic. He acknowledges the building's history, thanks the preservation community for caring. Then he pivots to reality. The structure is dangerous. Restoration costs would be prohibitive. His company has already invested serious money in plans and engineering reports, and the city urgently needs both tax revenue and visible development along Woodward. He never says it outright, but the message is clear. Nostalgia is a luxury Detroit cannot afford. The council takes no vote. Not yet. They thank everyone for their input and move on to the next agenda item. Outside in the cooling afternoon, Maria's expression is tight and tired. That did not go well, she says. They are going to approve it, aren't they? Jamal asks. Probably, she answers. Great Lakes has connections. They have done projects with the city before. Unless we find leverage we do not have yet, this is going through. Marcus checks his phone, frowns. I need to make some calls. I will be in touch. He leaves. The easy confidence from the coffee shop is gone, replaced by the quiet calculation of a developer who understands when the odds have turned. Jamal walks back to his car alone, drives to Woodward Avenue, parks across from the mansion. The orange notice is already up, tacked to the fence. Official city seal at the top. In bold letters, notice of pending demolition. Below that, a timeline. 30 days. He sits in his car with the engine off, staring at the building in the fading light. All that research, all those signatures, Marcus's plans, years of tours and stories, and still it feels like none of it is enough. His phone rings, unknown number. He almost lets it go to voicemail. Jamal, this is your Aunt Patricia. His stomach drops. His aunt never calls just to chat. It is your grandmother, she says. She fell this afternoon. We are at Detroit receiving. Can you come? He is already starting the engine. The hospital is downtown, about 15 minutes away. He makes it in 10. Inside, he finds his family in the emergency waiting area. His father, 2 aunts, his younger sister. His grandmother is stable. They tell him hip fracture, maybe more damage. The doctors are running tests. She is 87. At that age, a fall is never simple. He sits and waits. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead. Somewhere nearby, someone's phone plays the local news quietly. A segment about development proposals and city budget shortfalls. His father sits down beside him. For a while, neither of them says anything. Then his father speaks. You've been fighting for that building, he says. Yeah, Jamal answers. I think we are going to lose. His father nods slowly. Your grandmother used to clean houses near there. Different street, same kind of place. She always said those mansions were built like fortresses, like nothing could ever knock them down. They are knocking them down anyway, Jamal says. They fall silent again. Around them, monitors beep and hiss, machines hum, the hardware of keeping people alive inside a building that, once upon a time, may have been someone's grand house before the city turned it into a medical facility. Jamal stares out the window at the city lights. Somewhere out there, the Holbrook house stands in the dark, boards over its windows, notice on its fence, waiting for demolition, waiting to become just another empty lot on a street that is already mostly absence and memory. He is losing the building and maybe losing his grandmother in the same week, and he cannot stop either one. Chapter 12. Dinner with Not a Ghost. Rain falls on a Thursday night. 3 weeks since the hospital, 2 weeks until the scheduled demolition. Jamal's grandmother is home now, recovering slowly. The hip surgery went well, but she is smaller somehow, as if part of her strength stayed on the operating table. Stairs are now a team effort. Even short walks leave her tired. Most days she sits in her favorite chair by the window, watching the neighborhood like she is trying to memorize every detail before it changes again. Jamal knows he should be there with her, with his father, with the rest of the family. But tonight he needs to be somewhere else, to sit inside a building that did not lose its fight. He parks along Woodward, steps out into the wet, the rain tapping on his jacket, and walks toward the one surviving palace on this block. The old mansion-turned-restaurant called the Millionaire's Table. Inside, the air is warm. Soft lighting glows against wood and plaster. The architecture has been carefully respected. Original woodwork polished to a gentle shine, restored plaster moldings tracing the ceiling. The grand staircase coving up to the second-floor dining rooms like a spine of carved oak. They have done this place right. It feels alive, not frozen. History as a space you can eat in and talk in, not a glass-covered exhibit. Jamal takes a small table in a quiet corner, orders coffee, sits with the menu closed, alone with his thoughts and the low murmur of other people's conversations. An older waiter approaches. Jamal recognizes him from previous visits. Same silver hair, same steady movements. The easy grace of someone who has carried plates and stories through rooms like this for decades. Rough night? The waiter asks as he sets down the cup. Rough month, Jamal says. The words come out before he can soften them. The waiter nods once, as if that tracks. His eyes flick toward the rain-streaked windows, then back. You are the one fighting for the Holbrook house. Jamal looks up, startled. How did you know? Saw you on the news, the waiter says. My cousin sent me the petition. Said, look, somebody is trying to save one of the old bones on Woodward. He gestures vaguely around the dining room. This place was almost gone once too, you know. Early 70s. The offices renting space here left. Owner could not find anyone new. Building sat empty for almost 2 years. What changed? Jamal asks. The waiter glances toward the host stand, decides the room can spare him, and pulls out the chair across from Jamal. He sits down with the caution of someone whose knees complain, but who is too proud to show it. It is a slow night. His choosing to sit feels intentional, like he has been waiting for someone to ask this question. A small group bought it, he says. Not a big company. Just a chef who wanted a restaurant, an architect who could not stand seeing another mansion die, and a banker who believed they might not go broke. A faint smile crosses his face. They did not have much, scraped together savings, took out loans they probably should have been too scared to sign. He points upward. The plasterwork was falling in sheets. They brought in specialists and old-school plaster workers. Took months just to stabilize it. The staircase had rot and water damage. They pulled it apart and rebuilt it piece by piece, using pictures and old plans where they could. Would have been cheaper to rip everything out, drywall the whole place, and call it modern. But they did not. Did they make money in the end? Jamal asks. The waiter's smile turns wry. Not for a long time. It took close to a decade before this place stopped bleeding. But the light stayed on, and the building stayed standing. That was the win they cared about most. Jamal looks around again, seeing the room through that story, the restored details. The way the space balances old bones with new life. Servers weaving between tables, people celebrating birthdays, couples on first dates under a ceiling that survived almost a century and a threatened death. The Holbrook house is getting demolished, he says softly. 2 weeks from now. We fought. We had plans. We had a developer ready to take a risk. But the storage company with money and connections got there first. The waiter is quiet for a moment, weighing his words. You know what I learned working here? He says finally. You cannot save everything. If you try to carry every building, it will break you. But you save what you can. This one standing, he taps the table lightly. It matters, not just for architecture people, for everyone who works here, eats here, gets married in that ballroom upstairs. They may not know the whole history, but they remember the feeling of the place. That sticks. He pushes his chair back, ready to stand. Sometimes victory is not stopping every wrecking ball. Sometimes it is making sure that when they finish swinging, at least something important is still here. Even if it is one mansion left from 20. He returns to his work, leaving Jamal alone with the cooling coffee. Outside, the rain continues its steady rhythm. Jamal watches drops race down the glass. He thinks of his grandmother in her chair by the window, watching her block with the same concentration. He thinks of his father's stories about the houses his grandfather wired, knowing every hidden run of cable in walls. He never entered through the front door. He thinks of all the nights he has stood on Woodward, pointing at emptiness and saying, "This is where something used to be." Maybe that has been the mistake. Building a career on loss, on ghosts, and outlines in the air, instead of on the stubborn, ordinary work of keeping the survivors alive. The Holbrook house is probably already beyond saving. The paperwork is moving. The notice is on the fence. But there are other houses, other blocks, Other fights that are not yet lost by default. Jamal pays the bill, steps back out into the rain. For a moment, he stands on the sidewalk and turns, taking in the full facade of the Millionaire's table. The mansion that made it through. The one that proves survival is possible if someone stays loud and foolish and brave long enough. Across the street, the Holbrook house sits dark behind its chain-link fence. Boarded windows, wet stone, still standing. For now. Jamal pulls out his phone, scrolls through his contacts, preservation groups, journalists, former tour guests who ask to be kept in the loop. He starts making calls. If he is going to lose this one, he wants to lose it fighting. And he wants to make sure that when the walls finally come down, the city cannot pretend it never knew what stood there. Chapter 13. The New Millionaire's Row. The calls lead somewhere unexpected. Not to a last-minute rescue, not to a miracle court order, but to something else. Something quieter, that might last longer than any single brick wall. Catherine meets him at her office the next morning. The room is the same as always, file boxes, old posters from past campaigns. But she moves with more energy than usual. It is the kind of excitement that comes from a lifetime of small wins instead of dramatic victories. "I've been thinking about your petition," she says, waving him toward a chair. "Those 15,000 signatures, all those comments from people who remember these houses, that is not nothing." "It was not enough to save the building," Jamal says. The words taste flat. "No," she agrees. "But it is enough to do something else." She opens her laptop and turns it toward him. On the screen is a rough mock-up, a digital map of Woodward Avenue, interactive, color-coded by time period. Every glowing dot marks a mansion that once stood along Millionaire's Row. "We build a living archive," Catherine explains. "Every house that was here, photographs, floor plans when we can find them, architectural details, stories from the families who lived in them, stories from the people who worked in them. Your grandmother's memories, all of it in one place." Jamal leans closer, following the line of the avenue with his eyes. Click a dot, a window pops up with a photograph and a story. Another dot, a different house, a different voice. "Who pays for all this?" he asks. "We do," she says. "The Preservation Alliance. We've been tucking away small grant money for a project like this, and once it is built, teachers can use it, researchers, people planning walking tours. It stops being just a protest tool and becomes a resource." Maria arrives a minute later, still in her coat, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder stuffed with notes. She sets everything down and pulls out a chair. "I talked to someone at Wayne State University," she says. "They will host the site on their servers and put their name on it. They like that we are not only telling stories about marble staircases, but also about the people who cleaned those staircases, working-class narratives next to architectural history." The project takes shape over the following weeks. Jamal becomes the lead researcher almost by accident. He is the one who knows the street best, the one who has already spent years walking its length with a microphone in hand. Now he returns to the archives with a new purpose. Not to gather ammunition for a single fight, but to document an entire vanished world. He spends long days at the Detroit Public Library, the Burton Historical Collection, the Walter P. Reuther Library at Wayne State University. He digs out photographs of mansions demolished in the 1960s, the 1970s, the 1980s, tracks down their addresses, cross-checks them against fire insurance maps, plots their footprints on the digital Woodward. He starts interviewing people. His grandmother, on a good day, with a blanket over her knees and tea cooling on the side table, talks into his recorder. She remembers riding the bus up Woodward in the 1950s, pressing her forehead to the glass to see the mansions as they slid by. She remembers working in similar houses in other wealthy districts, the Boston Edison area, Indian Village, where the rules were strict and unspoken. Back doors only. No sitting in certain rooms. Eyes lowered when guests were present. She remembers the small humiliations, the occasional real kindnesses, the way money could make a house feel both beautiful and cold at the same time. Jamal records every word. Later, he plays the audio back at half speed, careful fingers on the keyboard as he transcribes. Her stories will sit in the archive right next to the formal architectural surveys, carrying equal weight. He tracks down descendants of families who once lived on Millionaire's Row. A woman in Ann Arbor whose grandfather owned an automotive parts company and threw winter balls that filled the society pages. A man in California whose great-aunt married into one of the Woodward families and saved boxes of letters and holiday photographs. They send scanned images, stiff formal portraits on marble steps, children in sailor suits on manicured lawns, handwritten invitations on heavy paper. He finds former residents from the era after the mansions were divided into apartments. A man who rented a room in the Holbrook house in 1975, paying $40 a month, listening to the building creak and settle at night like an old ship in a bad storm. A woman who once lived in a carved-up floor of the Henderson Mansion when it served as a boarding house for nurses in the 1960s. She remembers the drafty windows, the shared kitchen, the way you could still see hints of painted ceilings beneath cheap white paint. Every one of these voices becomes a dot on the map, a click, a story. By early spring, the first version of the project goes live. The interface is simple and clean. No clutter, no distractions. You open the map, zoom in on Woodward Avenue, and tap any point to see what once stood there. Then and now, photographs. Basic architectural information. Short text summaries. Audio clips you can play right on the page. A nurse describing her cold room under a cracked plaster ceiling. Jamal's grandmother talking about bus rides at dawn. A descendant reading from a letter written in 1912. Jamal records a walk-through himself. He walks the street with his phone. Camera pointed at empty lots and surviving buildings, narrating what used to be on each side. The recording becomes the audio guide for a walking route that teachers and tourists can follow. Within a few weeks, teachers begin using the site. A high school history class in Detroit uses the archive to map how redlining and freeway construction cut through their own family's neighborhoods, using Millionaire's Row as the starting example. An architecture professor at the University of Michigan assigns the site as required viewing before a lecture on urban decline and adaptive reuse. Local media picks up the story again, not front-page banner headlines, but a thoughtful feature in the Detroit Free Press. A 10-minute segment on public radio where Jamal and Catherine talk about memory, maps, and who gets to decide what counts as history. The story spreads through preservation circles across the country. Soon messages arrive from other cities. Buffalo has a street like this. Cleveland has one. St. Louis. Pittsburgh. They ask how the site was built, how the interviews were done, how they might adapt the model for their own vanishing blocks. The idea turns out to be easy to copy. Simple tools, clear structure, a commitment to including everyone's story, not just the people whose names were on deeds. Jamal adds a new feature, user submissions. A button on each page invites people to upload their own photographs and memories. Slowly, the archive begins to fill with snapshots from family albums and recordings made at kitchen tables. The map is no longer just his project or Catherine's. It becomes something shared. Something that can keep growing long after the Holbrook house is gone. One evening, his grandmother listens to her own voice on the website. The interview plays from Jamal's laptop, her describing polished banisters, strict house rules, the feeling of walking past Woodward mansions knowing she would never be invited through the front entrance. "That is good," she says quietly when the clip ends. People should know this. Not just the pretty parts, the whole story. Jamal closes the laptop and sits beside her. Outside, spring light fades over their block. Cars pass. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wails, and then fades too. The demolition of the Holbrook house is scheduled for the following week. He has not forgotten. The thought still lands heavy in his chest, but the weight is different now. The loss is still real, still wrong. Yet it is no longer a clean erasure. The building may fall, but its outline will remain on the map. Its stories will be there in voices and photographs and lines of text. The old Millionaire's row of stone and brick is almost gone. A new one, made of memory, data, and stubborn care, is starting to take its place. Chapter 14. The Building Compromise. The demolition date arrives, then passes, then arrives again, rescheduled. Great Lakes Storage has the permits. The equipment is booked. On paper, everything is ready to go. But something in the air has shifted. The petition, the news stories, the drone footage on television, the new digital archive built by people who refuse to look away. Jamal gets a call from Marcus. They want to meet, Marcus says. Who? Great Lakes. The city is pushing back. Your petition and the media coverage made this messy. They are asking if there is middle ground. The meeting takes place in a downtown conference room. Neutral territory, bright lights, generic art on the walls, a pitcher of water in the center of the table. The Great Lakes representative is the same smooth professional from the council hearing. But his tone has changed, less confident, more cautious. We have invested a great deal in this project, he says. We cannot simply abandon it. But we are open to creative solutions. Marcus has come ready to fight. He lays out new sketches, sliding them across the polished table. You keep your storage facility, he says, but you preserve the front facade of the mansion, the entrance hall, the marble staircase. You wrap the new construction around what survives. Those spaces become your lobby and a small museum-style public area. The storage units go behind and above. The Great Lakes representative studies the drawings, tracing lines with his finger. This increases our construction costs significantly, he says at last. By maybe 15%, Marcus answers. In return, you qualify for historic preservation tax credits. You get good press instead of bad press, and you end up with a building that has character instead of one more anonymous glass box. Maria leans forward, legal pad open. And you avoid a lawsuit, she adds, because we will file one. We know it is weak. We know we will probably lose. But we can drag this through the courts and delay your project for months, maybe a year. It is partly bluff, partly truth. The law is not on their side, but time is. Delay costs money. Investors do not like uncertainty. The negotiation does not end that day. It stretches over weeks, emails, revised drawings, quiet pressure from city officials who do not want another public fight. Piece by piece, the compromise takes shape. Great Lakes agrees to preserve the entire street-facing facade and the entrance hall. Marcus pushes and wins the main staircase as well, plus one original interior room, the former library with its carved oak panels. Those elements will be stabilized, restored, and folded into the new building. The rest of the mansion will come down. The storage facility will still be built, but not as a clean slate. The company also agrees to fund a permanent historical display in the entrance hall. Large photographs, clear text panels, and quick response codes that connect directly to Jamal's digital archive. Anyone walking in to drop off boxes will walk past the story of the street. It is not what Jamal wanted, not what any of them dreamed of when they imagined a full restoration, but it is not total erasure either. Demolition begins in late spring. Jamal visits often, standing behind the safety fence with a camera around his neck. The crews work carefully around the sections that will remain. Steel braces cradle the facade. The entrance hall is shored up from the inside. The staircase is wrapped and protected. The rest of the structure comes down in controlled bites. Roof first, then upper floors, then the internal partitions that once turned a single family's mansion into a maze of rented rooms. Jamal photographs everything. The exposed cross-sections of old walls, the pattern of joists and beams, the moment when the sky opens where ceilings once were. He documents the careful restoration work too. Stone cleaning, patching, the way new structure rises behind old stone. Every stage goes into the archive. The end of the house becomes part of its record. By fall, the hybrid building starts to make sense. A modern storage facility stands where most of the mansion once rose, but the historic front still faces Woodward. The entrance hall glows at night. The marble staircase curves upwards just inside the glass doors. At first, the contrast is jarring. Then it becomes oddly compelling, a visible argument between past and present that neither side fully wins. The opening happens on a cold November afternoon. There are speeches, cameras, city officials in coats, neighborhood residents curious to see what survived, preservationists who are still not sure how they feel. Great Lakes has done the historical display well. Large photographs of Millionaire's Row in its prime line the walls. Text panels explain what stood here, who owned the house, who worked in it, how redlining and suburban flight helped destroy the street. The language is careful, but honest. Jamal's digital archive is everywhere. Quick response codes beneath each panel, a small screen looping clips from the interviews. At one station, his grandmother's voice plays through speakers, describing the mansion she passed on the bus and the houses she cleaned in other wealthy districts. People stand and listen. Some close their eyes. Children race up and down the restored marble staircase, sliding their hands along the polished railing. Parents read the plaques. A line forms at the service desk as people sign contracts for storage units, surrounded by the story of the building they are now using. It is strange. A storage facility wrapped around fragments of a Gilded Age mansion, commerce woven through memory. Practical use alongside grief, but it is not an empty lot. Jamal stands in the entrance hall with his grandmother at his side. She is stronger now, cane in hand, coat buttoned to the chin. She looks up at the ceiling, at the restored plaster, at the staircase that survived fire, abandonment, and almost a bulldozer. It is not the same, she says. No, Jamal agrees. It is not, but it is something. She reaches out, resting her palm on the cold marble. My mother used to clean houses with staircases like this. She never imagined one of her great-grandchildren would stand at a place like this and be thanked for helping to keep it here. He follows her gaze to a bronze plaque near the entrance. Old Brook Building, historic entrance and library preserved through the efforts of the Detroit Preservation Alliance, Jamal Williams, and community supporters. The words feel too big for what still feels, to him, like losing more than winning. A fragment saved, most of the house gone. But a week later, when he leads his next tour, he does not gesture toward a fenced-off ruin or a scraped clean patch of dirt. He brings his group inside. He lets them walk up the staircase. He stands beneath the old ceiling and plays the audio clips from the archive. He points to the places where new walls meet old stone and explains how and why this compromise exists. The building is alive again, different, hybrid. Not what it was, but not nothing. On a street defined now by gaps and absences, that is no small thing. Chapter 15. What actually remains. Spring returns. Trees bud along Woodward Avenue. Jamal leads an evening tour. 15 people this time, larger than usual. Word has spread about the archive, the preserved entrance hall, the small victory on a street that almost disappeared. They start at the hybrid building. The group climbs the marble staircase, fingers grazing the rail that has outlived 3 different centuries. They pause at the historical panels. Someone asks if the building is haunted. Jamal smiles, softer than he used to. Only by memory, he says, which might be more powerful. They step back out onto Woodward and walk north. Passing the empty lots, Jamal no longer just gestures at open space. He pulls out his tablet, taps the digital map. Before and after photographs fill the screen. He names the families who lived there, tells the stories of the workers who cleaned the rooms, wired the walls, trimmed the hedges, owners and staff side by side, not one without the other. They reach the Millionaire's table. The restaurant glows against the dusk, warm light in tall windows, shadows moving in the old ballroom upstairs. This one survived whole, Jamal says. Saved and reused in the 1970s. It proves these buildings can have second lives. If someone fights long enough and hard enough. The tour ends where it always does, but something in the air has changed. He does not close on pure loss anymore. He closes with an invitation. This was the richest street in Detroit, he tells them. Most of it is gone. What remains are fragments, a staircase, a restaurant, a few carved panels, photographs in an archive. Stories people like my grandmother were willing to tell. He looks at the faces in the fading light. Students, tourists, locals who drove in from the suburbs to see what used to be here. The real dark story is not that these buildings fell, he says. Buildings fall everywhere. The real darkness is how easy it is to forget they were ever here. To forget who built them, who maintained them, who got pushed aside when the money moved. That forgetting, that is the crime. A woman near the front lifts her phone. Can we share the archive? She asks. Please, Jamal says. That is exactly why it exists. The montage that follows is quiet, gentle, spring light filtering through restored windows at the Millionaire's table. Workers on lifts, cleaning and repointing the hybrid building's stone facade. Jamal's grandmother at her window, wrapped in a cardigan, watching the neighborhood like a book she knows by heart. Students on a field trip standing in the preserved entrance hall, listening through headphones to voices from decades ago. Teachers tracing routes on old redlining maps, showing kids how the colors shaped their city. Children running hands along marble that was carved before their great-grandparents were born. Other preserved districts around Detroit, Boston, Edison, Indian Village, where entire blocks survived because someone drew historic boundaries in time. Painters refreshing porch trim, gardeners cutting back rose bushes planted generations earlier. Quiet, ongoing work that keeps history from sliding into dust. Jamal records a final entry for the archive. His voice is steady, unhurried. We did not save everything, he says. We saved pieces. For now, that has to be enough, because that is what we have. He pauses, choosing the next thought with care. The question was never only about one street in Detroit. It is about what we choose to remember. And who gets to be remembered? The wealthy families, yes, but also my grandmother on the bus, my great-grandfather inside the walls, pulling wire, everyone whose hands touched these buildings and made them real. The last image, evening on Woodward Avenue. The hybrid building lit from within, its old stone front holding steady against a new glass body. The restaurant across the street glowing like a lantern. Between them, the empty lots where young trees push up through the soil, slowly reclaiming space that once held mansions. And on the sidewalk, a small group walking with phones raised, following the digital map. Listening to the past in their headphones,